So, welcome to this English lesson. I am going to start streaming. This is a live lesson, and welcome to you if you are watching live. In this English lesson, we're going to learn how to learn English through stories. How you can improve your English by reading and listening to stories. Now, if you are new here, my name is Jack, and I help English learners reach a high level of English. So welcome to you if this is your first time here. Now, let me double check everything is working okay. It looks like it is. People are joining live. So if you are watching the replay, know that this is a live lesson. And here are some comments that people are leaving. We've got Rife here, 45th parallel, cool name, Nadia, Dima, Bouquet, Vivian, say hi for me, Vivian and Ziza. Hello, Ziza too. Solomon's here. Alan is here. We have a few others joining as well. Olga, who has been away for a while, and it's good to have you back, Olga. Evelyn from Bolivia, Hussein, Skyfall, Diego, Ania, Vivian. Just so many people joining live. Toral as well. Yeah, it's been a while, Toral, since I've seen you here. So it's very good to have you. Again, if you are just joining live, we are going to learn how you can improve your English through stories. Okay, how you can learn English through stories. And I'm going to give you many tips here. And at the end, I'm going to give you some amazing resources as well, and some recommended books that I think are fantastic for people who have an intermediate or higher level of English. So that is the topic for today. So just quickly look at your screen. As I said before, this is a live English lesson, and I call this the Tefluency Show here on YouTube. We go live on YouTube once, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times per week. This is the second time we have gone live on YouTube this week. So let's start with the definition of a story, because I think this is really interesting. So look on your screen now. Now, this is a definition taken from dictionary.com. And a story is a narrative, either true or fictitious, in prose or verse, designed to interest, amuse, or instruct the hearer or reader. You can also call it a tale. So it's a narrative. It can be true or it could be fictitious in different types of formats. And the design of this, the idea, is to interest someone, to amuse them, to make them laugh, or to instruct them, to teach them. And notice here it says the hearer or reader, because stories come in 2 main formats, and we're going to talk about that soon. But stories can be either written or they could be audio. Now, things have really changed over the years, because now we can listen to stories on our smartphones. We can listen to stories on our computers. We can listen to any story told in the world. And it's an incredible thing. In the past, we had to listen to stories from our friends, people who we were in the same situation, or on the radio, or on television. But now we have access to so many stories, both written and also audio. So let's just see the comment section. We've got just the ladies here as well. Anine says, I'm a good listener, but I can't speak English fluently. Excuse me. Alan is here as well. Igor from Brazil. So good to have you all here. This is going to be a really fun lesson. So there are 2 types of stories. Let's have a look at what those are. Firstly, non-fiction. Now, a non-fiction story is based on fact. It is based on fact. The opposite is fiction, which is based on imagination. Quick question. Do you prefer non-fiction or fiction? Non-fiction or fiction? Let me know in the comment section. Now, personally, I prefer non-fiction. I prefer reading non-fiction. I'll show you a couple. 1 second. I'm just going to find some. Okay, so I have a couple here. These are two of my favourite books. The Magic of Thinking Big and How Successful People Think. So these are two books, non-fiction. I prefer reading non-fiction. You're going to see another of my favourite books very soon. But let's bring up the comments. Let's see what people are saying. We have non-fiction, we have fiction, non-fiction, doesn't matter, fiction, non-fiction. I'm in the fiction club, very good. Both of them, fiction, both, fiction. And Anna says podcasts as well. I like to listen to a lot of English podcasts. Sawa says non-fiction. So we have a variety here. I think mainly fiction. Now, I think that I need to read more fiction. I need to listen as well to more fiction. And it's something I'm going to do soon. In fact, it should be a resolution for me in 2017. Okay? Next year, I should read more fiction. But let's move on. The next thing I want to share is a quote about storytelling and stories. And I love this quote. So it's on your screen now. Excuse me. I'm going to read this to you. People are hungry for stories. It's part of our very being. Storytelling is a form of history, of immortality too. It goes from one generation to another. And that's Studs Terkel. So storytelling is a form of history, of immortality too. It goes from one generation to another. But look at that first sentence again. People are hungry for stories. People are hungry for stories. Now, in this case, to be hungry for means you have a strong desire for. So people have a strong desire for stories. And one of the main reasons, in fact, there's so many different theories on storytelling. And people say it's part of our evolution. It's part of the way we became human because we based everything on stories. And I'm going to share a book in a second which it talks about this in such a fascinating way. But first, the other thing about stories, they are memorable because they stir our emotions. So stories are memorable. We can remember stories because we feel emotionally involved in stories. So when someone is telling us a story, sometimes we feel excited or scared or happy or sad. And we feel like what the storyteller is feeling or felt during the time. So if someone tells you a love story, then it can make us feel really happy. If someone tells us a scary story, then it makes us feel scary. And when our emotions are involved, it becomes more memorable. Now, this is linked to learning language and learning English because if you are listening to a story that's really memorable, you're going to remember the words and phrases. Your emotions are attached to those words and phrases. Okay? So it's one of those things that if you learn English through stories, you're going to remember and be open to more language. Let's bring up the comment section. We have a great comment here. They yearn for stories. Can we say that? Yes, we can. People yearn for stories. They're hungry for stories. They have a strong desire for stories. So great, that's a really good phrase to learn. Now, here is that book I mentioned before. Civilization, A New History of the Western World by Roger Osborne. Now, he talks about, in this book, going from an oral culture to a written language culture, and how that affected us, how that changed the way we think, how that changed the way that we act as a society. And it's just fascinating to read. So if you are interested in that subject, about how we went from telling stories orally and how they passed down from generation to generation, how we went from that type of culture to the written language and reading, if you're interested in that type of thing, I highly recommend that book. So I'll show you that book again. Civilization, A New History of the Western World. Now, talking about stories, I like to introduce storytelling into my lessons. And on your screen you can see the video that I made 2 days ago, on Monday, about how I ran into a friend. And I told the story about how I ran into a friend on the way to work and we had a conversation. And we used the phrases, how's it going? Want to grab a coffee? Let's meet up this Friday. And I tell it as a story so it's more memorable for you. And I've got some more resources soon that are going to give you more stories. They're going to give you interesting stories with language so that you can learn English. And that link is actually in the description too. Just going to have a look at the comment section. Pinar says, how can we find stories for our English level? I'm going to talk about that soon, Pinar. I've got some interesting links for you and some advice as well. Now let's get into some tips. We're going to look at tips for books. You know, what kind of books you should get, how to find the right books, how you should really consume those books. And then I'm going to talk about other ways that you can listen to stories from different websites as well, because it's not just about books. Okay, tip number 1, get the audiobook. So when you are finding books, find the audiobook as well. You can find the audiobook on Amazon, you can find it in the library, and I'm sure there are different ways to get these audiobooks too, ways that a lot of people use, but personally I prefer to stay away from. I think you know what I am talking about. But get the audiobook, listen to stories. In fact, what you can do is you can listen and read at the same time. So when you have a new story, when you get a new book, get the audiobook, listen and read at the same time. It's going to help you in a big way. It's going to help your listening. You need to get used to the sounds of English. And if you listen and read at the same time, then you can match the pronunciation to the words that you read. And over time, the more you do this, the more you'll understand how words are pronounced, how sentences are pronounced, about all the different types of pronunciation too. You know, the different areas, relaxed pronunciation, reduced vowels, those types of things. So always get the audiobook if possible. And what you can also do is you can read the book and then listen to it while you're doing other things. Now, Amazon have a great way of doing this. They have something called WhisperNet or something like that, Whisper Sync, where on your Kindle device you can listen and read at the same time. But also if you listen for a while and then you go back to read it, it goes to the place that you last listened to. It's a great app to have if you can get that. Let's bring up the comment section. People are posting links to where you can find audiobooks. Harry says, what's a good way to start storytelling, Jack? If you want to, I guess if you want to improve your storytelling, I think a good way to do this, and another good way to listen to stories, is comedy, stand-up comedy. When somebody is telling a story on a stage to people. The difficulty here with stand-up comedy is that it can be quite difficult to understand. The humour in general is difficult to understand. And a great example to highlight this is that if an American watches a British stand-up comedian, sometimes they don't understand the jokes. And the opposite too. If a British person watches American stand-up comedy, sometimes it can be difficult for them because the comedy's different. They use different reference points. The culture is different as well. And comedy is very subtle. It's all about the small details. Okay, so tip 1, get the audiobook. Listen to stories. Improve your listening. Tip 2, find interesting books. Find interesting books. You know, this is something I've talked about a lot. You don't want to just read a book if you're not going to enjoy it. There's not a book that you have to read to learn English. You can read anything. There have been studies that showed that they took a group of kids and they split them into 2 groups. And one group studied for the exam, okay? So they studied text for the exam. The other group read whatever they wanted to read, read things that were interesting for them. And this group performed better than the other group. And the idea here is that any type of reading is good. Read things that are interesting to you. Listen to stories that are interesting to you. So always find interesting books. And I've talked about this many times. I have talked about this a lot, but it's so important. Because if you find something that's interesting, you are engaged. You are open to new language. But also, you are going to learn the words and phrases that you're going to use in real life. Okay? Because we talk about things that interest us. I could read a book on horse riding, for example, in French, and learn all the words and phrases. But I'm never going to talk about horse riding. I'm not interested in it. But if I read a book about football and learn some words and phrases to talk about football, then I can use this because I like football. I like talking about football. So it's always important to find books that are interesting to you. Somebody asking about the camera, 60 frames per second. No, I don't think this is 60 frames per second. I think it's 30 frames per second, but it is a 4K camera. Bruno says, I like true stories. Sevda, the best idea, I think, subtitle YouTube soap operas. Yeah, it's a great way to learn English. Movies with subtitles. Skyfall, I'm reading Start With Why from Simon Sinek. I find it very interesting. Yeah, I started that book, but I actually preferred his TED Talk, his presentation on it. So we'll find that. Someone says, really interesting books are hard for me to find. Yeah, sometimes as well, it just depends on your motivation. Sometimes you don't feel motivated to read a book. Like you're not in the mood to do it. But if you find a good book, there's nothing better than that. Okay, so tip 2, find interesting books. However, there's a problem with interesting books, and it's related to tip 3. Tip 3 is don't make it too difficult. And don't find books that are too difficult. And this is one of the biggest problems for anyone learning a language, because you want to find interesting books, you want to find books that interest you. But sometimes those books are too difficult to understand. especially some novels where they use very dramatic and poetic language. And when they do that, it can be really difficult to understand what is happening. So what we want to do, we want to find that balance here. We want to find a balance between interesting books and books that we can understand. Because if there are too many words and phrases that we don't understand, it's too difficult to read and it's not enjoyable. So I've got some advice for you on that soon. But yeah, tip 3, don't make it too difficult. Look at tip 4. It's on your screen. Okay, tip 4. Join a book club. Join a book club. Now, my wife is part of a book club. In fact, she is going to her book club tonight. She's going there tonight. So this is where you read a book and as a group you meet and you discuss the book. Now this is great for many reasons. You're going to make new friends. You're going to be able to practice the words and phrases that people use to discuss this book. But also it makes you actually read something, because you don't want to go to a book club without having read the book. If you go there and if you haven't read the book, then it's really embarrassing. So it makes you actually do it. It makes you read the book. It gives you a deadline to read the book. So joining a book club can be a great thing to do. Now, you can do this online or you can do it in your local area. And obviously, what we want to do to improve our English is to find a group who want to talk about the book in English. We want to be able to talk about it in English, read the book in English and talk about it in English. In fact, a while ago my wife was thinking about starting a book club for English learners, and we might do that again in the future, where we can choose a book and then every month meet, talk about that book, learn the vocabulary, etc. Let me know if you think that's a good idea in the comment section. So tip 4, join a book club. Let's look at the comments. J. Pablo, let's go create one. Exactly. Felipe says, how to balance between input and output. Yeah, it is a tough balance, but know that with input, the more you do, the better your output will be. It's also easier to get more input than output. It's easier to listen to something than have a conversation with someone. But I also think it's important as well to do output in a way that isn't just always conversations, to repeat phrases, to write down phrases. So there are many ways that you can do that as well. But a really good question. 45th parallel, I like reading short stories. Yeah, that's it. Short stories, fantastic, because you don't have to commit to a long book. Instead, you can enjoy a short story, enjoy another one, and another one. Helen, do you mean to read books adapted to different levels of English? Yes, we're going to talk about that soon. Okay, we're going to talk about books that have been adapted. But next, tip 5. Are you ready? Look on your screen now. Tip 5 is this. Test a book first. Test a book first. Now, I'm sure you've done this. You read reviews of books and you buy them. Or you go to the library, you just take a few books and take them home. But once you start reading them, you don't enjoy them. They're not for you. You're not going to get a lot out of them. So what I recommend you do is test it. Read 2 to 3 pages of the introduction, or go to the middle of a book and start reading, and then just see if it's for you. Now you can do this for free on Amazon, where it says look inside a book. If you just go to Amazon, the website, and then find a book, click look inside, usually you can read 10 pages for free. So that means you can test that book first to know if it's going to be interesting and okay for your level. Remember, it's that balance between interesting and not too difficult. So test the book first. Test it before you start reading. Tip number 6, stories are everywhere. So we're not just talking about reading books here, we're talking about listening to stories and reading stories. So, excuse me, stories are everywhere. We talked about a great example with stand-up comedy, where we can listen to stories, and comedy is something that is memorable. Again, a story can amuse, it can make us laugh. If we go back to that original definition from dictionary.com, designed to interest, amuse, or instruct. So with stand-up comedy, we're talking about amuse, we're talking about making people laugh. And when we laugh, we remember stories. Again, it's our emotions, and we remember things that we are emotionally involved in. So again, stand-up comedy is fantastic, although it can be a little bit difficult. So yeah, stories are everywhere. I'm going to give you some examples now. Are you ready? First one, BuzzFeed have an article. The link is in the description. 12 storytelling podcasts that you need to be listening to. So these are podcasts or radio shows that tell stories. And if you go to that link in the article below in the description, then you'll be able to have a look at these podcasts. And just like I said, test the book first. We can test podcasts. Listen to number 1. See if you like it. If not, go to number 2. Test it first. We don't have to listen to things that we're not interested in. Now look on your screen. I'm sure I'm going to just change that address in the bottom. I'm sure you've been to this website, TED.com, TED Talks. So most TED Talks start with a story. When I was at college, I weighed 500 pounds. I have lost this much weight. I felt so bad. I felt so terrible. But there was one day when I met a friend, and this friend told me a really interesting story. And he said this. So what they're doing in these TED Talks, that is not real, by the way. That's just imaginary. But what they're doing in these TED Talks is they're telling a story to engage you, to make you interested in what they're going to teach. So they're telling you a story in nearly every TED Talk. What's your TED Talk? There's always a story. Always a story. Usually the story is I wasn't doing very well, and then I made a change, and now I'm doing very well. I was really bad at this, but I made a change, and now I'm doing this. A lot of those stories are like that. So TED.com, TED Talks, a great way to listen to stories. And a huge benefit of this website, this is huge, they have transcripts. So you can listen and read at the same time. You can watch these videos and you can see the transcript. It's an incredible thing. And take advantage of it. Take advantage of this. Next, probably my favorite resource. I'm going to just delete that because it's not BuzzFeed. This is probably my favorite resource for you guys. English listening practice. This is where I tell stories on my YouTube account here on YouTube, and you can listen to them. You can listen to these stories. Most of these stories have transcripts, they have language analysis, and I just tell stories about my life so that you can listen to them, feel engaged, and learn language in a natural way. So I have a playlist below. Check it out. Watch these videos, watch them all, and listen to interesting stories and learn fantastic English. So, quick recap. We have podcasts, fantastic, listen anywhere. TED Talks, full of stories, and you get the transcript. It's free as well. And the best resource, in my opinion, is this channel here. let's have a look at the comment section before I give you one of my favourite stories or my favourite books for English learners. Jocelyn said you should drink more water. Yes. This is water today. It's not a smoothie. If you saw my lesson the other day. Let's have a look. I'm Polish, but I live in the UK. Thank you for your lessons. Good to have you here. Where in the UK are you from? I've got someone from Aleppo. TED Sword or TED or abbreviation. TED TED Talks. If you just search for TED.com, you'll be able to find it. And we've got Rabia here as well. Good to have you. Okay, let's move on. Look on your screen. Recommended books. I have one for you. I mean, I've already introduced Civilization, if that interests you. But if you're interested in general fiction, I recommend this. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. So, I actually read this, I think in 2007. Yeah, it was while I was traveling. I read this while I was traveling when I visited my wife in the US. She wasn't my wife at the time, but we were dating, you know, we were in a relationship. And she loves reading books. My wife loves reading books. And she had this one, and I started reading it, and then I was hooked. It got my attention. But it's a fantastic story, but not only that, it is very simple language. It uses language in a simple way, in an everyday English way. Because a lot of novels, they use, as I said before, poetic language. Fancy long words that people don't use in conversation. But this book, it's such a simple book to read, relatively. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. There's also an audio version too. Okay, let's have a look at something else as well. This. Now, someone asked about this before, graded readers. And I'm not going to give you specific ones, but if you just do a search for graded readers, these are books that have been adapted for intermediate or beginner or advanced learners of English. So if you are intermediate, if you are advanced or a beginner, you can choose a book relative to your level. And this solves a problem in many ways. Firstly, a lot of these have audio. A lot of these books have an audio version. Secondly, they're interesting. The stories that are really interesting. I used The Gladiator when I was teaching in Spain. So I bought this book and I used it in my lessons. So you can buy books like The Gladiator, any kind of famous book. But then what they do is they simplify the book and use everyday English. They use English according to everyone's level. And it's a great way to read interesting books that aren't too difficult to understand and also have audio. So on your screen, search for this, graded readers, and I'm sure a lot of you have used them before as well. You've probably used them in class, or you've seen them in local bookshops, you've seen them online. They're everywhere, graded readers. So take a look at that. Very good. Rife says graded readers are really amazing. They are. I mean, they're such a good way to learn English. Let's have a look. I read books in English that I did like in my native language. Helen, great. Yeah, if you read books that you have already read in your native language, then you understand the story, you understand what's happening, and then you can fill in the gaps. You don't have to concentrate on every word. You already have the story in your mind, and then you can focus on the words and the language. Yeah, it's such a great way to do it. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for watching this lesson. If you have watched this far, then please give it the thumbs up and also share it with your friends. And if you are new here, just click that subscribe button. There'll be a picture on my face soon. Just click that button, click subscribe, and then you'll get notified when I go live and notified when I upload a new lesson. Now, there's one last thing. What I want you to do in the comment section is to let me know your favorite book. Your favorite ever book. It doesn't have to be the one that you read in English, but just let me know, what is your favorite book of all time? What is the best book you have ever read? And if you have any more tips about learning English through stories, then please leave them below as well. So everybody, thank you so much for being here. This has been so much fun. We've had over 100 people watch this live, which is fantastic. 103 people are watching this right now. Again, if you're watching the replay, thank you for being here. Speak to you all soon. Keep learning English, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye, everyone.